Flame Breather X Invincible. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. Will Duncan take kind of me to his new life? Will he lie? Will he be the king of the kaiju, or will he be a new superhero in this new life of his? His father wants one thing, but his mother wants another in the universe of Flame, Breather, and Invincible. He doesn't know what hero to beat. All the comic books, and all this, and all the superhero shows, too, and what comes next. He doesn't know what to do, but knowing about the future of the both universes, will he stop future events before it happens? Will he make a new path for himself and his new friends? We will see. Let's get started to our character. Duncan is in the office. He's prick. He's pretty sick. He's been sick for all his life in a hospital. Bed in hospital. Need to trying to decide his boredom. Duncan only uses comic books in his little iPad that he has, and he's been told he doesn't have that much longer to live. And Duncan hears this finished watching all the seasons of Invincible so far that came out season 4. It's about to come out pretty soon. And his nurse Sarah's saying, Duncan? Duncan says, I always feel. Sarah says, your family left a message again. Duncan says, Yeah, Sarah's cheer up. Duncan says, any minute, I can go the life that I have right now in this hospital bin. And we gone, how am I supposed to enjoy it? How are you supposed to be okay? Sarah says it'll be alright. It always will be alright. Time skip. He reads the Invincible comic one last time, the last issue, and then goes back to bed. What he feels his body getting weak, and in his eyes are starting to close, and then he sees the goddess of reincarnation. Duncan says, Are you? What are you? What I think you are. She says, Duncan, I know you do have to hide to your illness, and I wasn't fair to you, so I'm going to give you a chance to be different. The god is a reincarnation, says, I hope we will reincarnate you in the world of Invincible, but I will give you superpowers. But it will also have some differences. And Duncan thinks, really, I'm going to that world. But the world I was reading the comments about the world that I would watch some shows and everything, and in Flame Breather, I remember I watched the movie NSCNC comic books in the series, and the god of reincarnation says, I'll give you some extra abilities too. I will give you the power of the Flame Breather, and god of reincarnation says this world will be like the same. Good luck and have fun. Dalontae says, wait, I still have questions. How many wakes up? So, Duncan goes to a mirror and sees his body. His skin tone is different. He has orange skin, blonde hair. It says, I'm in the body of Duncan from Flame Breather. He goes downstairs. Duncan's mother, I said, okay. So here's the deal, no fights, and try and socialize this time because there's a brand new school. And I know it always doesn't end up though. Duncan says, okay mom, I need to put up the hand. Love you in sign language. He walks to school. He looks at the school and it looks like the school or Mark went into. He goes into the school and goes to the principal office saying, Sir, I'm new here. I don't know where to go. Can I have a guide? The principal gives him a schedule. He says, Mark Grayson, can you come to the principal office, please? Can you see Mark? The principal says this is going to be Mark Grayson. He's going to be your guide. Satisfying. Duncan, nice to meet you. Mark says, so, are you just moving in? Dan says, yes, I've been moving to town for a while. Mark says, I hope you like it here then. At the bathrooms and here's the classroom. He goes to the classroom. This is our next class. And you see the same teacher that introduced him in the movie, and she tries to say his name, his full name, and Duncan says, just call me Duncan. The teacher says, take a seat. And Isabel's Kenny doesn't have a partner. Duncan, sit over there. It goes kind of like how the movie is. Duncan discovers a caillou, and he tries to get it. But this time Mark says, what was all that about? Duncan says, so you know about Kaiser's Rydell comes and says, so what did you hide in your jacket? Duncan. And Mark says, when did you get here? There's a few minutes ago. Mark says, we're going to gym class next. He goes to gym class and his gym uniform. Duncan talks to the gym teacher, and he sees it is Bones, the secret agent that's supposed to be looking over Duncan. Duncan says, oh, so what are you doing at this school? Wasn't you a principal at the last one? Barnes says, at the last school, I could only yell at the kids. Being a gym teacher, I can be a little bit more physical. Mark gets a few of the people That's what Mark says, but it knocks out a few of the classmates. It's only Mark. Is Troy the bully drove the last ball. Duncan catches it, and it kind of goes the same way the flamethrower movie went. He starts catching the balls and bouncing all three of them, growing them each to the bullies, and almost hitting Troy in the face with the ball. Mark says thanks. Duncan says don't mention it. They go back to the gym locker and get dressed in normal clothing. Some work is what was that all about. That seemed like it was your reason, so you have reflexes, and on stuff. What's next? Duncan says it's nothing, not really, it's just like the tires of the boobies, just bullying people. And what the guys kind of seems like your friend didn't seem too bad of a person. He's not. Maybe you should go to this party that everybody's invited to. Duncan says I'll think about it. Mark says okay. The book The Booty starts coming in, and then Troy said I don't like how you did us in gym class. You just a bunch of jerks. Now it's time for your little welcome. Duncan. Mark says just leave him alone. Duncan says this go Mark, I'll see you later. Mark says no and gets punched in his stomach. Duncan gets a ball from the gym class and throws it. He starts running from the classroom. While Mark is recovering, Mark is trying to find a teacher. Anyone you try and get help. Duncan is using parkour jump. Jumping is in the library, jumping on tables using the banner as it like some type of rope, and swing from it. And Heath and Duncan says great. I just did what the main character of the Flame Breather movie just did like in the movie. I got myself in the corner. But before that happens, Mark finds Barnes and Mark starts catching up with Barnes and, as Troy the bully trolley tried to hand him like in the movie. Duncan activates his fire breath, and he breathes down fire saying leave me alone, and she's fired from his mouth. And Mark says so he has superpowers. Barnes knocks off the fire, stomping it out before it gets worse and covering his mouth, and says if you don't get to class right now, I'll dispel you. And Barnes says Mark come with two. Duncan said it wasn't my fault, and Barnes says don't worry about it. I was gonna bench him anyway. He throws fine, but he can't catch a ball to save his life. Duncan and Mark goes to the bus, and Barnes unlocks the jet and in the bus kinda activates and flies to a hidden base. But before they get to the base, Mark says so, what you have super proud or something, and Duncan says kinda. I am a half human half dragon, kaiju creature kinda. My father's is the king of the kaiju block. Mark says what your dad's the king of the kaiju. You mean that war that happened so many years ago, that was your dad? Yup. Duncan says, if it wasn't for my mom that day things could have gotten a lot worse. Says his own secret, well my dad's on me, and Superhero 2. Duncan tries to act surprised. But in his head, he says, already knew that, but I gotta act surprised. Duncan hears a system in his head, says flame fire breath. Unlocked. Duncan says what is this assist system? What is this so leveling now? Duncan said, so what's that about you, your dad? A secret. Mark said my dad said that I will get superpowers one day, but they haven't kicked in. Duncan says you might be a late bloomer. They go to the secret base where they prepare as a secret lab. Mark says this has been here the whole entire time. Duncan says yeah, probably okay. I might have not said this in the end, but why is our gym teacher keeping an eye on you? Duncan says Barnes is kind of like my babysitter. He's been kind of being like a secret person that's been keeping an eye on me since your son of the king of the car. Basically he's been following me to school. In the scientist says Barnes, what can I do for you? This time, Barnes says Duncan kinda had a little accident at school today. He unlocked by her breath. I think can you do like a full body scan? The doctor, the scientist says who's this? Mark introduces himself and says I'm a classmate. I'm kind of solved the whole thing. Barnes kindness says he's only man's son. Wait, the superhero, that's what the scientist says. Then the doctor does a full body scan and says since you were in a fight. Our response, it kinda unlocked fire breath. You have a Duncan, you learn to control it eventually. You might have the potential to do a lot more, and Barnes has to the doctor secretly. Will he be coming for it? The doctor says he's a good boy. I don't think he will become a friend, or says you just said he would have new abilities and strength. Yeah, but doctor says he's a good boy. Duncan's mom comes through and says, "Why do you have my son on the table?" Barnes kind of talks to her and says, "Your son kinda has like had a little accident at school, and who is this?" Duncan says, "Mom, this is Mark Grayson. He's a classmate that I met today. Mark's nice to meet you, man." As Barnes and Duncan's mom is talking, Duncan kinda believes fire. It makes a fire wheel in and pushes it over to Barnside. Barnes looks up and says, "What is this?" Duncan said, "Do you want to ride, Mark?" Duncan's mom says, "This was not a normal day for you." Duncan says, "No, it wasn't, but it was not a bad day either. I tried not to fight like you said, and I also don't try to make some friends. I think I did pretty well." Duncan says, "Yeah, it was a pretty good day." Mark says, "You should totally come to this party, though I don't have our classmates there." And Duncan's mom says he'll be there, and Mark says, "Okay, maybe I'll get William and Isabel and Kenny, and we'll pick you up." Duncan's mom drops off him. Duncan's mom says, "Oh, so it seems like you didn't make some friends today." Duncan's, maybe I did. "You're definitely going to that party." Duncan says, Mom, you believe in Maple Skeeple's way a lot." He gets ready to go to the park, and Duncan says, I'll be back a little bit later. Mom, have a good night." And when Duncan closed the door, he sees Mark, he see Isabel and Kenny and real William. William introduces Rick. William says, "This is our good friend. Let's get the show on the road," and goes down the street. Duncan asks who's hosting the party. "It's gonna be Jenna, the studio community person, student president." "Okay," Duncan, in his head, says, "So this world has Jenna in it from Flame Breeder." They walk into the parties. Kenny says, "Are you sure about this?" "Pretty sure," everybody says, trying to be encouraging to Kenny. They're drinking drinks, trying a good time. They kept saying talking. General walks up to Duncan and says, "I don't know much about you, so tell me up yourself." Duncan says, "Sure, what do you want to know?" What is Duncan all about? "Well, I just moved here. I live with my mom, and that's about it." Jenna says, "What about your head?" Duncan says he travels a lot. "Don't get to see him that much, but I do get to visit him whenever you like. We care sometimes. But lately he hasn't really been showing up. So what about you?" That's what Duncan says. Jenna says, "I'm just a typical average girl, you know pretty much everything." Troy tries to pull Jenna away and says, "Stay away from him. He can do crazy things." And then she says the one thing of dating you. And Troy's father comes to pull him away. Troy's father says, "I thought I told you were grounded," and put in choice for closing away, and everybody says he's busted. Isabel, Kenny, Mark, William, Roy, and Jenna works outside. Duncan says that was not so perfect, it wasn't it. "So I think you want to go inside now." As they triangle inside, they hear shaking. Earthquake happens as it happens. Isabel and Duncan hide behind a car. Even Isabel looks. She says, "Isn't that the king of the Cardew?" And she says, "Why is he here?" Duncan says, "He's here because of me." "Because of you? Why, he's not his block king of the kaiju, he's also my father." And Duncan says, "Ron." Isabel, Duncan says, "I'm not kidding. He's actually my father." As Isabel tries to run, Block put his tail on her. Duncan says, "You're crush her, let her go." As he's getting angry, he throws a motorcycle at him. Let her go as he's running away. Mark gets an idea, saying inside his, "This would really be a good time for my powers to kick in right now." And he runs in, flies off the ground, and tries to bump into the Block. Block tries using his fire breath on Mark, and he swings Mark, and he takes Duncan. Duncan says, "Where are you taking me?" And she's fire breath at him. In Block's, good Duncan. Duncan is saying, "Why are you coming? Why now you leave me and my mom for a very long time. Why are you here now?" "Because of your birth rate, Duncan. You must become the king of the kaiju." Duncan says, "As what, you want me to take your place?" Block says, "It's your birth right, it's what you're supposed to be. It's what you're supposed to do. Living with these humans is made you weak, makes you soft. So what, you're just supposed to train me for something I don't even want." As that conversation is going on, Mark is trying to figure out how to fly. Kind of keeping up, but kind of stumbling. Back to the Block, and Duncan. Block is holding Duncan. And then he's blowing fire, and a secret patches his way to his lair. Yes, Block says, "Welcome home, Duncan." Duncan says, "This isn't my home. That doesn't change that my father is a kaiju." The Block says, "I'm not just a kid. I am the king of the Caillou. The block tells Duncan about the ancient past, saying that he's been in here for hundreds, even 1,000s of years. The humans drinks were the outcasts, but we've been here from the very beginning. Duncan see all the crystals and all the fossils and everything on there. Block says, they expired us. Come, the block runs in this kind of hallway and introduces Duncan to other kaiju. One of the kaiju say, first you tell us not to attack the humans. Now you meet with one of them, the block says, who challenged me, who challenged their king. In Duncan's thinking inside his head, this is when he tosses me in the lava. Black throw hands the volcano, and ass Duncan jumps out the lava. The system says transformation unlocked, and Duncan briefed the fire. Passing out. As Duncan wakes up, Duncan stands up and kinda look himself, and he's kind of scaly and everything so, and Duncan says to himself, oh great, I had this look, could be worse. Mark goes down in farming, find them. Mark says, I finally found you. Duncan says, you can finally fly, huh? Mark says, finally, yes. Duncan says, what do we do now? Mark says, we can go back to my house and try and figure out some things. Duncan says, do you know how to fly back to your house? Mark takes Lies home. He opens the door to the back door. And Debbie, his mother, says, how was your night? Mark says, not so good. This is my friend Duncan. Debbie says, what happened to the two of you? Mark said, we got attacked by a dragon. The positive thing is, got my powers finally. I slide. I don't know how about you, but I got my powers, but I'm pretty tired. So can Duncan stay over? Duncan says to Mark, can I borrow some clothes too? Duncan says, Miss Grayson, can I use your phone? Duffy says, sure. Duncan closes his mother. His mother says, are you okay? What happened? A lot of things happened last night, but I'm okay, I'll come and get you. Duncan says, okay. Duncan said to Miss Grayson, my mom's coming now, I don't know when she's coming, but she's coming. Duncan's mother goes to Mark's house and talks with Debbie. My mother says, I'm Debbie. Nice to meet you. And Duncan's mother introduces herself. Duncan's mother says, thank you for looking out for him, and thank you, Mark, for looking out for him too. He hasn't really had that many friends. Debbie said, I'm just glad that Mark can help out. Before Duncan and Margaret leaves on, the man comes in the door and says, am I late? Duncan is thinking inside his head. They don't even know that if Mark tells Army Man, Mark tells his father, and things will be bad for this universe. How can I spend this? I'm not strong enough to find them this yet. He's got years on me. Nolan says, hi Margaret, it's been a long time. Duncan and Mark says, you know each other. Nolan said, I was there when it happened, when your dad attacked. Duncan is thinking inside his head, so that's the difference between the Flame Brewer movie in this universe. Nolan, so what happened? He works at Duncan and Mark. It looks like you two had quite a night. Mark says, I got my superpowers. Nolan says, that's great, buddy. I'll train you right after you get some sleep. You probably have a lot. You probably had a long night. Margaret and Duncan gets in the car. Margaret drives, and then get to their house. Margaret says, ain't that at night, wasn't it? That's what Duncan says, and he walks up to his room. Duncan is looking at a system menu. Duncan is looking at his skills and is saying, Flame, Breather, Fire Breath, Level 1, Super Strength Level 1. Firing Fireproof Level 1. Duncan also looks at the shop, all that they got a belt. In the description is the belt is able to keep your molecules about the same, without aging. Duncan thinks to himself, I can use that for Monster Girl when I meet her in the universe, a teleporter, that is a mini porter. And he rose out the window and his wings popped out and flies in the sky. After having a little of a flight, he comes home, what's on his shirt, and goes to bed. Margaret checks on Duncan and sees he's fast asleep in his bed. The next day, Mark and Nolan is training. Nolan is trying to explain to Mark how has powers works. Nolan is saying that we can make our own gravity, that you can buy for points, 50 points, special peppers that can improve your firepower and new skills, fire manipulation. He takes off his shirt, transforms into his Transformers state. We don't need to push off at anything. He also says flying is like a muscle, so you have to relax it. Mark push forward. And Nolan keeps up trying to talk to him. But then Mark marched Lance and makes a crater. Mark is trying. Punch Nolan. Nolan's you should punch more like this. Then he pun real hard. Mark walks inside with a mad expression on his face. Debbie is saying, "Did you push too hard?" Nolan says maybe Mark would have been better if he didn't have his powers. Dick, he goes to school, and he sees Duncan. Duncan says, "Hey, how you been?" Mark tells him about everything, the training, the hell. He thinks he's a disappointment to his father, everything. As they're walking to the class, the one bully that picks on Mark shows up, his police Mark racing. He says, saying going ahead, but Duncan tries to step in. But Mark says it's okay. They gave him a few punches. But it doesn't work. Duncan is saying it's going like in the TV show. William says, "What got into you?" And Mark says, "I need something to punch." Mark says to Duncan, "Meet me outside after school." Time passes. In a fly into the city, Duncan says, "Is that really a good style choice?" Mark says, "That's all I got." And Duncan says, "You sure it's not like a suit crafter or something like that? That you can get a suit from now?" Duncan, knowing inside his head that it is a suit crafter. "But I'm not gonna spoil the fun." That's what he says inside his head. They fly down into this alleyway where he sees his man. He looks like kind of stone, and Duncan says inside his head, man, this guy, he's a big part in the story. But this time things will be different. Dunk says to Mark, keep the damage to a minimum. We don't want to destroy the city. Duncan starts punching. The villain says, "What are you two supposed to be in?" Duncan introduces himself as Flame Breather when he started punching the villain, cracking the armor, and keeping the damages to a minimum this time. Didn't the show? Nolan comes in and says, "You two kept the damage to a minimum." Nolan. Duncan and Mark fly onto a rooftop. Nolan says to Duncan, "So it seems like you did get some parts from your father. The full dragon or kaiju aesthetic." And Duncan says, "Maybe I did," points to his son saying, "Mark, what was you doing out there? You might have kept the danger to a minimum this time, but you could have did a lot more damage. You don't know what you're capable of yet." Mark Canada says, "I can do it this time. Hit me, and let me prove to you that I'm strong enough for that. This is what I wanted since I could remember." Takes them to the suit cracker, but Mark are saying, "You're taking us shopping?" Nolan, "Yes, I am." And they walk into the workshop. Mark says, "I'm getting a costume." "We're getting costumes." The suit crafter says he's catching on quick. The suit crafter says, "So do you two have names yet?" Duncan goes first and introduces Flame Breather. You crafter says, "Okay, I can work with that." He says, you kid, you have a name yet?" Mark says, "Not yet." Duncan says, "Can you give me something that stretches and doesn't rip easily, can let my wings show through? Maybe I can just have pants." Okay to see. Crafter says, "You give me ideas. I like this. Duncan. You already know what you want now, trying to get your friend on the same page. His powers just kicked in, so he doesn't really know that much. Give him time. The next time you see him, he'll probably rushing through with his brand new name." Duncan says, "I like them. I like the suit. Not bad, not until I tell my mom. Can I keep this?" The suit crafter says, "I made it for you, so yeah, you can keep it." Duncan flies home. Margaret is setting up tables. "We have you been? And what's this outfit?" "Okay, I'll be honest with you, Mom. I'm becoming a superhero. What's this really about? Wow me and out and stop the criminal today. Then his father showed up, took us to this nice crafter person, and I became a superhero from." Mark doesn't have his name yet. Margaret says, "I was supposed to give you a normal life, not this." Duncan says, "My life is but normal. I got a hat. I got a dragon parent, basically a kaiju as a father, and my skin is orange. It's not the normal skin color, and I have the extra abilities, so what did you expect me to do with them? At least I'm using these powers to help people, not hurt people." Margaret. Duncan says, "I will. I'm serious with." Margaret says, "If you get hurt or extremely worse, I'll take you out of this superhero stuff right away." Back to Mark. Mark and Nolan is playing catch. He's talking. No one is talking about how some kids, when they're younger, think they're invincible, how strong they are, but you're different, way different, stronger, faster, you can take more, and then he throws the ball. Mark says that you threw the ball, it's kind of tangled a little bit. Nolan said, "But you caught it." That's the thing, people think they're invincible. But you are actually invincible, and he rushes back to the Seacraft. They're saying I got the name. In the classic invincible suit, finally emerges. He flies to Duncan Mendel. Mark knocks on Duncan's window and he says, "Come outside." Duncan says, "Is that your suit not bad, Mark? As I also got from now on, call me invincible." Duncan is thinking inside his head. "Oh man," Duncan says, "give me 1 second." Duncan tells his mother that he's going out. Duncan's mother says, "Be careful. And make sure you come back, I will." Mark says, "What is that about?" Duncan tells him everything, how his mother knows that he's a superhero now. They find this criminal with a laser gun and some high technology. They beat him up. Mark doesn't give him no chance to breathe. He's basically dragging him as he punched him. He says, "Give up, 'cause I am invincible." Mark starts saying, "Did you want some of that?" Duncan says, "It's okay, happy that you got your supersuit and everything too. Is there out the Guardians of the Globe? Get a call, each one of them in their cities, get a car to the base." They get there, and it basically goes down the same way and went down in the show. They trying to fight back. They're wondering why Army Man, when I get them trying to fight them off, but none of them make it, and all mean Nolan passes out. A few hours later, Cecil's men come in, scanning the area, trying to see who can be saved. He gets all my man, some other people trying to save them. The morning starts happening and Debbie wakes up and she's walking, looking around. Has this weird feeling. She's talking to Mark saying, "Your father didn't come home last night," and Mark is basically saying he might have got very under her. Now Everest again is Duncan is getting close to her, Mark's house. He says, "Mark, what's happening?" Mark says, "Something happened to my dad last night." Duncan's scoot over. Donald is introduced in, like, telling them about the facility, saying, "This is where we work with superheroes," trying to introduce him, and basically saying maybe one day we'll work with the two of you. In Mark and Debbie sees Nolan in a bad shape, and they say, Mark says, "What did this to him?" Cecil comes in and says, "We don't know." When we got to the scene, most of the Guardians of the Globe was already taken out. Cecil says Nolan was the only one that survived death. Debbie says, "Get me some time, and give me some towels, some tomato supplies, and give me a couch for me." Cecil says he's in the best hands that he can be in. Debbie says, "I'm not leaving his side him up. I'm not leaving him," and Cecil just shakes to thought. Cecil gets a call on his communicator saying a big worse going down. Duncan already knowing what it is, it's the flex sense. That's what he says inside his head. Duncan says, "To see a week ago." Cecil says, "Are you sure?" Duncan says, "It isn't that right, Mark, and you said it yourself." Cecil, "You're over you low-staffed at the moment." They go downtown and see the army of Flaxtons walking through the portal. Duncan says, "This is what we're gonna do. I'm gonna make a fire shield or on everyone, then we're gonna let loose on these people, on these creatures, whatever they are. Collect." Duncan shoots fire and uses the fire in his hands to make fire wheels, destroying the machines. Mark is collecting new people and Duncan is putting a fire shield ever he's shooting the fire, and the team comes in, duplicate, explode Robot and Adam Eve. Adam Eve uses their shields, and Duplicate uses multiple clones of herself. They retreat because their time was up this time. Robot says, "You actually did pretty good, you tell." Robot says, "So who are you?" "I'm Flame for you. Nice to meet all of you." Mark kinda looks at Adam, even kind of says hi all accurately. Nothing's just thinking inside his head, like he doesn't even know it, but they get there in the comics and the shows, pretty much every universe. Robot, "You should probably make a machine to make sure that when they come back we'll be ready." Robot says, "Not a bad idea. Also, I think there are time span in their dimension is not, it's quicker than ours." Rex says, "How do you know that before their machines is rotted?" Just a Robot says, "You're smarter than you look." "No, I just was very observant." Mark flies to school and so does Duncan. Mark says it wasn't that Adam person good, she was amazing. "You think she has a boyfriend?" Duncan is saying, "Dude, you're thinking about her way so much, calm down." They walk in the hallway, and they see Duncan thinks to her himself, and says, "You don't even know that she's in the same school that we go to." And Duncan does nudges him, and says, "Hey, look, doesn't that look like her?" Mark says, "What, it's been in the same school?" That's what Duncan says. Mark says what Duncan says, go talk to her. Mark starts thinking about it, and Duncan just pushes him over there. This starts pushing. It says, hi Eve, that's what Duncan says, and her friend walks away. And Eve says, do I know the deal with you? And Mark says, you kinda helped us out. And he says to help you out yesterday, and Mark kind of whispers, I'm invincible, and Duncan whispers on Flame Breather. And Eve says, oh wait, you're two superheroes that saved the day yesterday. Do you two want to talk today? It looks like you want to talk about yesterday, that's what Eve says. Eve and Mark and Duncan goes to the rooftop. And Mark says, so how has we never noticed you before? And says, if you don't expect a superhero inside your school, you're not going to expect a superhero at your school at all. Eve says you didn't do too bad yesterday. They actually saved a lot of lives before we got there. Mark says it was our first day, we kind of just started being superheroes, and Duncan says, I think we did pretty good, wasn't too bad. Yeah, it was those Jacksons will come back eventually, they won't stay down forever. They were treated into their portals, so we need to plan on that, and Eve says that. That idea that you gave Robot might help, and Duncan says, yeah, you're right. Eve says, do you want to meet the team after school? And Mark says, team, and Mark says, I don't know, they were third rankings. If your team was at the fourth Frank, I can't remember. And Eve, see you after school. Invincible and Flame Breather, and this jumps off the roof. A few minutes past Mark and Duncan, and Eve is flying to the base. Eve says even Duncan and Mark are flying. Mark, trying to keep up with Eve and Duncan, and Eve says, let's try this again, and Mark and Duncan and Eve take off. They get to a rooftop, and the top of the roof opens up. Rexplode says, so why are you with these two? Eve says, we go to the same school, and Robot comes out and thanks for the help. My breather, and Invincible. Mark says, you're welcome. Duncan's no problem. Robert says, this is duplicate in. Duncan says, wait so you can basically clone yourself. Duplicate says, yes, it's based on that's basically my power. In the sensor from earlier goes off. A robot says, do you want to help us out this time? We're better together. Mark and Duncan says we're in, and then I start flying to the scene. Rex Duplicate, and Robot rides onto this hyperbook thing that Robot made. Eve, Duncan, Denmark are flying on the scene. Rex says, why is they not getting old robots? Shouldn't they be getting old robots? It seems like they figured out how to stay in our dimension longer. And Duncan thinks inside his head, they stayed in this dimension because they had the wristbands. Duncan says, hey guys, look on their wrist. It's respect, does the little scanning thing. Robot says, Wayne Breather's correct, I think the wristbands is what we need to aim for. So they start till we start punching, and then Jackson's goes, well, Adam Eve constructs some of the Jackson, pulls out a tank, and blasts them. Now they have something to hold in flame, Reaper's wings, and place, and they have something for Adam Eve, the blaster, on her face, and they have concrete for Invincible. One holds a blaster to Adam Eve in Invincible, says no, screams it and gets emotional, adrenaline energy, and it's funny. He flies, starts punching the action in the face, and being him badly up. Flame Breather tries to break from the strength, and he does. Rob finally gets out of the shock, gets one of the wristbands. He finds the right sound to break all the wristbands, and they start getting older. Then they start retreating, but then Duncan goes in the portal. The portal closes. Mark says, blank brief are not now. And no one comes in. It seems like you handled this all on your own. And Mark says, Dad, Duncan in there. He'll be okay. Mark says, how do you know he's going to be okay? He just got his powers, just like me. Mark and Nolan flies away to her home. Mark comes inside the house, looking disappointment in mad at himself for letting Duncan go in that portal. Debbie and Margaret are sitting at the table just talking, having a good time. Margaret says, where's Duncan? Mark says he's in a different dimension. Margaret says, what happened? Mark says he went to a portal with the accents. She starts for her knees, starts worrying my boy. Margaret says, we gotta call Cecil. We gotta call someone, we got to. I can't lose him. Debbie says, we won't. We won't lose him. We'll try and find a way. Nolan says he'll probably just find his own way home. Margaret gets angry and says, "Why was you there? Where are you? When people really need you, decline first guard, and now my child, how good are you? No one says, are you questioning me? Are you really questioning me?" Debbie says this is not the time to start pointing fingers. We need to talk to Cecil. They go to Cecil and Debbie says, "Seesaw. We have an issue. Flame breather went into a portal. And we want to know if you can back. We don't know what dimension he's in. We're just gonna wait. We're just gonna have to wait." C questions Nolan, "So C service. So you still can't remember who got the Guardian's eye?" Nolan. "So I told you everything that I remember. Run that by me again." Nolan says, "I got a call from the Guardian. By the time I arrived, everything seemed fine. And then I got a black, then the lights went out, and then the lights reappeared, and then I turned, and when I found the eye I fought until I couldn't fight anymore. So they made the go knock you." Margaret said, "It's not important right now. My son is in a different dimension." Cecil, "That is not. This is not the time to be questioning about the Guardians. I'll get someone on it right now." Margaret, "But right now you're just gonna have to go home and try and calm down." As they walk out the room, Cecil says, "Everybody out. I need the room cleared out." The special detective comes in the room and says, "Oh, Cecil, what do you want before I send you back home?" "I checked the blood. It was definitely a fight and definitely struggle. Don't tell me something I already know." After he leaves, Donald says, "So what now? I want cameras. I want severance on Nolan." Donald says, "You know what will happen if you move. That's a chance I'm willing to take. No chances. I need to figure out what happened to the Guardians of the Globe." They start flying Mark and Nolan. Mark is still thinking about Duncan inside the portal, and no one says, "Why are you still thinking about it?" Mark says, "Because he's my friend, Dad. Look out for him, and he's wanting to a portal." No one says it was probably his own stuff, his own dumb choices. Mark says, "Really, you're really gonna say that about him?" And Mark flies home. And Nolan says, "I didn't mean to say that." Debbie says, "What did you say in the Mark? I meant said something insulting about Duncan. What did you say?" That's what Debbie says. "I said he might have went in the portal. Because his own stupid choices, he might have took an incentive." Debbie says, "Of course. He's gonna take an incentive. He's talking about his friend. Mark doesn't know if he's alive, if he's living, or if he's dead or something else. I don't know. We're just gonna have to be gentle on the subject, as this is happening." Cecil's people the next house over, scanning them and listening onto their conversation. Mark as Rex is with Duplicate, kind of spending time together and making out, and Adam Eve kind of catches them in the act and says, "Rex, really?" And Eve runs out and flies over to Mark's house and knocks on the window. "I can't believe this." Mark says, "What's the problem?" Eve says, "Rex cheated. I'm so sorry about that." That's what Mark says. Mark kind of got jerk vibes from him earlier. Even Duncan was saying he was a jerk anyway. "I'm so sorry. Hold her tight." A couple days passed and Eve says, "So do you want to go somewhere, anywhere? It seems like you need to get out too." Since Duncan, Mark says, "Do you think he's okay?" He says he seems like a strong person anyway. They get a call from Cecil. It says, "I need both of you and Melt much rush." No rush. And Cecil says, "Please don't mess it up." They're flying in. The villain says, it's the way you know it has to be your outfits that is not that good, like where's the pants? And who has signed it? He uses "see what's making earthquakes." And he just kind of jumps away. Eve says, "For the record, I made my own outfit." And he breaks the statue, and Mark says, "Oh no." Cecil said, "Watch it and don't break it." Mount Rush Ward. Mark Connis sees people kinda on the edge and the villain breaks anything. And Mark kind of spins himself, going into the ground like a drill, and catches the people before they drop. He gets the people and put them on a safe area. That's not broken. He tries to save the villain, but then he falls into the lava, and he says, "I should have worked on a jetpack." As that works, Mark tries to catch him, and Eve uses her powers to push the lava down, so you can save the villain, and they get out of there. Eve is feeling more emotions, feeling happy with Mark. Eve is saying, "So, do you want to do anything later, Mike, like go on a date or something, or outing?" And Mark, "I'm sorry, you just got out of a relationship, and I shouldn't be doing this." And Eve says, So actually what I wanted, maybe Saturday it is. Mark says he flies home. Debbie looks at Mark's face and says, you look happy. Mark says, I'm going on a date Saturday. Saturday, huh? A date with a girl. Nolan says they're finally having a funeral for the Guardians the Globe. Mark says, I thought they already had a funeral, that one was just for Shell. Nolan, Adam, Eve, Debbie, Margaret and some of the family is there. And Nolan gives a speech saying that when I came to this planet, I had friends, they gave me a place to go, when no one else, when I thought I didn't fight alone. We fought together, and I hope the rest of the Guardians can rest together as well. Red Rush wife falls through the ground, and he says when she says, Joseph, I still can't see, he's finally stealing steel, and I still can't see Joseph. And she falls to the ground on the mud. Debbie and Margaret picks her up and says, what's this, go okay? As they're walking away, Nolan senses. Why are you here? You wasn't invited. This is a private funeral. The secret detective says never invited to these things but always come anyway. Mark talks to Eve and says this could have been me or my father. And Cecil says to Robot, I need you to make the new Garden of the Globe. Robot says it would be my honor. And it cuts back to Duncan. No, let's back this up a little bit. Please, you see Duncan actually help the vaccines, making a peace treat, and actually here his bones have been getting stronger faster. Even he looks at his system, says the strength 80%, 80 endurance, 100 speed, 100. No in the system, as nothing can pierce your skin anymore. Fire breath 100 system says, do you want a couple options at the shop? You have a bill needs abilities. Tab resolving energy from any energy source or power source, having talents using your fire to make you go faster, going supernova, superhero, X-ray vision and vision. To see from far away placed him. Duncan says to the system, what's happening, how much passed? What episode am I on? The system says you're on the episode where they're having a funeral. Cecil has talked to Robot and says make the new guards the globe. Dump says, I gotta get out of here soon. They're gonna make the new Guardians of the Globe, and I'm gonna go down. What's the vaccine leader? He says, so Duncan, so what will you do? I will go back to my world, but you're nicer than all these other humans. Why do you want to go back? I got some people back in my world that I need to see several text, but I'll come back eventually. This is only a temporary goodbye. I'm glad that the system made me speak their language and survive in their environment. I need a shower and some other steel. He teleports home making a portal. Margaret says Duncan and runs and hugs him. Mom, am I? Margaret says, no sweetie, you're not. I'm just glad you're home. Just glad you're home. Looks like I'm interrupting something. I'm just gonna take a shower and gonna go see Mark. You were probably worried about me. Okay, Debbie says, how did he get back here by himself? Margaret says it doesn't matter, he's home. He's finally home. Duncan is taking a shower trying to see how strong he actually is after he's done. He finds some clean clothes and says, finally, I'm back into the real world, but my body hasn't really changed that much. The system says host body is half kaiju, so your body is not really gonna change. Nice. He flies over to Eric's house, knock on the door. Nolan opens the door and says, hey, Duncan, you're back from your little trip. Duncan says, you can say that is Mark here. No, Nolan says he's in his room. He's go upstairs listening with his superhero and walks in with them, marking Eve kissing. And he says, what did I walk into? Mark says, you're back. Duncan says, when did it start happening? It's always good to see you two again, but didn't expect this. Eve says, how was your trip? Duncan says, first to start off, it was good. I'm sorry that I walked into your little moment, or I'm happy for the two of you. Mark starts talking about what happened after you went into the portal, and Duncan starts explaining that I can kind of talk in that and vaccine. Now I help their creatures out so there won't be attacking us anymore. And yeah, I basically help the whole civilization. Mark and Eve says that's pretty nice and pretty cool. I got some cool stuff from them too. So let's get to the real question. When did this start happening exactly? And Duncan holds up his arms in a whole position, and it's and then I start talking and tell them about everything. I knew Rex was a jerk. Mark, so did you tell your mother yet? Hadn't had a chance to wear that it was Eve, but she knows that I'm dating some girl. They don't know what's even yet. You should get like something also in William and also Canning and Isabel. And they go to Bargain Mart and talk about all the other stuff that happened. So, Duncan is playing what happened in the other dimension. Mark says all that happened you helped them. Then Eve says robot. We got permission from Cecil to make a new guardian of the globe. Duncan thanks and says inside his head that's pretty much what happens in the story. Says what are you thinking about Duncan? Duncan says nothing about. After going home, Margaret, Duncan's mom's, how was your day? Duncan says pretty good. I hanged out with my friends, catch up. And now Cecil is making a new Guardians of the Globe. I'm gonna go to bed now. Mom, that's what Duncan says. But before he goes to bed, he checks his system and seeing how much points he has in a check system, and it's shop, multi-universe, travel advice. Thanks and pays for the multi-travel device in the system. The description of the device, it says you can travel to the MCU, the DCU. Nice, that's what Duncan says. I wonder could I get some DNA to make me stronger? That's gonna be something I need to test. And I need to give Monster Girl this that I have, because I need to make sure she doesn't end up with Robot in the anime. It seems like they were getting along, but in the comics it does not end well for her. Right now, I'm gonna sleep. The next day, we do the Guardians of the Globe base in the tryouts. Now you see the normal tryouts and stuff like that. Eve has been beating up a cat. Rex is using his explosions like always. Duplicate is hiding, and the little ant, man, that little tiny person goes to the gorilla person. All the tryouts be pretty good. Robot Axis, Flame Breather, and Invincible to you to join. The two are very strong and fast. We could use the most muscle on the team. Flame Printer says I think we should join. Monster Girl is beating up Rex. Eve is having a smile on her face. Invincible is saying should we stop this? Flame Breed that goes down and says this is enough. He had enough. Monster Girl says in her big green Hulk state and says, okay, Scaly back away and pushes them away. But he pushed off the wall and punches him. Enter and transforms back into our normal state. When Breather says are you okay? I'm sorry that I stopped you from beating him up. Monster Girl says, no, it's my fault. He called me a cannon and I just can't. It's always gets me riled up and stuff like that, so I'm sorry. Eve says La Breather, you're better than me. Robot cuts the team together. They say we'll be in touch and give the team their number. Unique Duncan and Mark go back to his house. Duncan. Hi mom, how was superhero tryouts? Debbie. What you didn't tell me people that I know. Mark says had tryouts. They was trying to make a new Guardians of the Globe. Seesaw teleport to the Marks. Well, that says I will be Invincible. Flame Breather Duplicate. Monster Girl. Black Samson Shrinking. Ray new Guardian of the Globe. Go to their new base. Duncan's says I just had time. I need to prepare for a lot of stuff. They go wake up, they go home. But before they do, good if you are home. Duncan says, what do you need? Cecil says there's a Martian coming to Earth and I need you to deal with him. Duncan's which one of us? Cecil says just you both. Then Nolan comes home. Nolan says what are you doing here? Sis, I'm here to offer. I'm here to call on your son and Duncan to go on a mission. Nolan, this is when we want them for. Cecil said, you know that alien that you keep like beating up and oh, that's what Nolan. Mark says I'll do it pretty simple. It should be pretty simple. Mark says I'll be home shortly. Wait a minute. Mark says how do I breathe in space? Nolan says you don't. You have to hold your breath. Duncan and Mark fly up in the sky, and they look around, and then Alan, the alien, punts Invincible, and Duncan Alan gets a couple punches and Duncan grabs him with his tool hands. And then Alan says, who are you? I reckon I recognize the yellow person. You look kinda different. Duncan says, what are you doing here? And then Alan breaks the hold of Duncan and goes to Invincible and starts punching him and punching him and punching him. And then Alan goes inside Mark's head and Mark says timeout. Alan says you're calling a timeout. Mark says you got a timer, you got a timeout of future. The system says, Do you want to communicate with Alan the aim? And Duncan says, wait, I communicate with Alan without him doing his whole going inside your head and talking. Duncan says, inside his head. Go ahead, Duncan says, hold up, man. Alan says, you can talk to me with me reaching out to you. Yeah, something like that. He says, I was here to look out for a planet. So is this planet so and so and so? And Alan says, Mark says, this is Earth now. Alan says, I am totally on the wrong planet. Mark goes. They go back to Mark's house and tells them that Alan the alien is actually not a bad guy. He's actually, I think he's an officer checking on planets because he said he was checking to see how strong the protectors of the planets are. Oh, he's actually pretty cool. That's what Duncan said. The system says you got 50 points for handling that situation. Duncan says I have to go home. See you, Mark. See you tomorrow. See you, Miss Grayson, and see him, Mr. Grayson, and he goes home. Duncan goes into his house and walks in the house and he talks to his mom. Margaret says, how was your day, Duncan? Well, Mom, I started in. It was pretty much a misunderstanding. Margaret says, so is that all pretty much? How was school? Not that bad. You know, I just hang out with the normal friends and stuff like that. And then the house starts shaking. Duncan says, not again. And after I just got this fixed. And the monster takes Margaret and Duncan call Cecil on the intercom. And then Cecil says, and Duncan says, Cecil, these kind you are after my mom. They have her follow my location and get the new guards of glow on this. I fly into the cave and Duncan just looks at all three cartoons. How many times do I have to keep doing this? Duncan says, giving back my mother. And the lock is just staring there. Duncan says, is this your fault? What is this? A stupid test? Duncan is feeling rage and anger, and in the system window comes on and says, battle lost ability that boosted your strength, your speed, and every other ability that you have at the point. Okay, so he gets faster, and he punches one of the kaiju in the face, putting his mother down, unleashing his fire breath, growing so hot that his fire is starting to be blue. He breaks the ceiling, and most of the kind you get knocked down. Duncan punches his fuck their block in the face, and I said, if you ever do this again, even though you're my father, even though you mean me, that doesn't mean you just get that you send your kaiju after me and block this. Smiles block this. Says, you're getting stronger. Good. Duncan says, is this all the game to you? As the Guardians of the Globe, this shows up. Robot says, you already dealt with the situation. Invincible says, what is this? Everybody just keeps. Duncan says, Guardians of the Globe. Let's go home. He picks up his mother and flies out of there. Invincible. We might have to see over your house again. We need to call. Cecil think they close their eyes. In a little bit forward, and they're in the Guardians HQ. And they're training. Monster Girl is training and Robot gives her a training regimen. Denies. And he said a robot says that it's real. Monster Girl says, with my transformation, I can't train. Duncan says, can I cut in? I've been still studying your transformation, and I pull out the belt with this. Should stop you from aging backwards. This could help you. Hate to try it on. Monster Girl puts on the belt. No transform, now the transform. Monster Girl says, I feel different, but a good different thing. Girl hugs Duncan, and Duncan hugs her back. Duncan is training with Monster Girl, so how are you feeling? Pretty good, that's what Monster Girl says. This bell is pretty amazing, so tell me about yourself. Monster Girl, my real name is Amanda. Duncan says, my name is Duncan, and he transforms back to normal. Grabs his hand, and then says, you don't look too bad, it could be worse. We're moving away from that love, away from Duncan. For a little bit, Mark was taking care of Elephant Man. Ask for my ass, looking at the Frank. So we get a time skip of Frank, this bad guy, fighting all these bad people off. Are we? Now? You look pretty nice when you're not Transformer. That's what Amanda says. You look pretty. Duncan says, thanks for the compliment. But this is my one with my orange skin, and then when my father threw me in that volcano, or just changed me. A man grabs it, he goes outside the balcony. Frank's little girl. Can I sit with you? And Frank says, let me help you, sweetie. He picks her up and lets her sit in the balcony while he sees Invincible. I wonder, and as his daughter says, isn't it, is he a good guy? Frank says that's what everyone says. And that's the end of this. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe.